Hey there, Mama. You're listening to the Lift the Shame podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, mama of 5 and your family's intuitive eating dietitian, here to help you cut through the diet culture clutter so you can enjoy freedom with food as a family. I'm on a mission to help you end the generational legacy of diet culture in your home so you can experience motherhood free from food guilt and body shame. Listen in weekly for guidance on how you can ditch diet culture, heal your relationship with food and your body, and confidently raise intuitive eaters. Let's dive in and lift the shame together. Welcome back to the show, Mama. I'm so glad that you're tuning in and spending some time with me today. This episode is airing just a few days before Christmas, and so I'm just thinking about you as you're navigating the busyness that this holiday season brings. And I really am just hoping that this time that we have together can just bring you some encouragement, especially as you think about, just the different scenarios that come up with holidays, especially when it comes to food and bodies and the potential impact on our children. And I know that you want to do everything in your power to help support your kids and really protect them and shield them from all the different ways that diet culture shows up, especially around the holidays. And so I'm hoping that I can give you some encouragement along this part of your journey. And again, just really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. I am getting over a cold, so I appreciate your patience with the cold voice today and hoping that you and your family are staying healthy. I know it's wild out there right now. So let's dive in. I really want to chat about, not just really protecting our kids from diet culture during the holiday season, but also helping them become resilient to it. I know in so many conversations with many of you that there's this, impending fear of our kids being immersed in this world that's so saturated in diet culture. And I get it. I share so many of those concerns. It's really scary, and the impact of diet culture can be terrifying. And so many of us are, trying to repair and unlearn so much of the damage that has come with being immersed in diet culture. And so, I want to just encourage you to know that it kind of goes beyond just protecting our kids. We definitely want to protect them, of course, in the ways that we can. I also just want to encourage you to think about this bigger picture of helping them become resilient to diet culture, like really to become immune to it. So, it's my hope and dream that in our generation, we will see diet culture start to crumble. And I also recognize that this is a journey and something that, will happen over time. And I hope that we'll see a lot of it happen in our generation. But essentially, we want to be able to support our kids to be resilient to the many forms of diet culture that they will encounter and all the different messages that they may hear, so that they are not as impacted by it. And I'm calling this the holiday edition of this version because I think this is a conversation that will likely require a lot of unpacking, and I'm hoping we can have definitely more episodes about this. But for today, I just wanted to delve into, some of the aspects of how diet culture shows up during the holidays. And before we get into that, I do just want to recognize how challenging and tricky the holidays can be, especially if you are healing your relationship with food or have had this history of a tumultuous relationship with food in your body. I know the holidays can be so tricky and just bring up a lot. And there's a lot going on that makes that happen. There can be a lot of triggers that are being resurfaced, especially when you are having encounters with your family of origin. So, holidays tend to be a time where we're getting together with family, with other people. And this can be hard if you have had trauma around food and your body in particular with your family of origin, and to come back together and to see old behaviors, or for example, something that I see or something that I've had even in my own journey is, seeing parents or grandparents kind of perpetuate or recycle those old behaviors or those old messages around food and body that we grew up with and that we're trying to break away from. So for example, if you grew up hearing that you needed to eat everything on your plate and you're kind of healing from that and unlearning some of those messages that were communicated to you. And now with your own children, if you hear, those same caregivers repeating those messages, that can feel really unnerving and just bring up a lot, right? It can bring up a lot of those old wounds around food in your body that you're now trying to heal from. And so I just want to acknowledge again, a lot of the pain that can come up around holidays, especially holiday gatherings, holiday meals. Holidays tend to be very food focused and food centered. And so it makes sense. And I share this just to create awareness and just to help you go gently with yourself and really give yourself compassion, knowing as you go into some of these scenarios, sometimes it's a replay of things that we've been through as a child, and to see our kids go through some of these same things can really bring up a lot. And so I just want to encourage you to lean in with curiosity and awareness. If you find yourself feeling triggered, or you find yourself feeling unnerved or frustrated or angry about something, lean into that and try to, draw some connections about what's coming up for you. And this really just helps position you in a better way to support your children. And again, I mentioned that it's very common to see diet culture resurface in a bold and fresh way during the holidays, which can always be hard, especially if you have been doing this work. I think in our homes, in our safety of our own family units, it can feel a little easier to implement some of the things that we're learning, especially when it comes to feeding our kids. And then when we move into the outside world and we are talking with other people and we are conversing with family and friends, and, we have family members who are questioning how we're feeding our kids, we can feel like the odd man out, right? Like we can feel like the fish that's swimming upstream, and everyone's like, what on earth are you doing? This makes no sense, because a lot of these values and the way that we choose to feed our kids that honors and supports their body and is building body trust and autonomy and connection. A lot of these approaches are very counter-cultural. And so they often are directly clashing with diet culture. And for families that are still really entrenched in diet culture, it may not make sense to them. And so I also just want to encourage you in that sense, because as you're conversing with other people, or as you're having family meals or holiday meals with other individuals who may not really get what you're doing, you might feel like they're throwing you shade, they're questioning you. You might even question yourself, like, is this right? Does this make sense? And that's where I really just want to encourage you to come back to your values, to come back to the things that are supporting your kids, especially long-term, in this long-term goal of helping your children, grow in the innate intuitive eating abilities that they have, and supporting them in self-regulation and building trust and confidence in their bodies so that they don't become victims of diet culture. And I did just want to spend a little bit of time kind of defining diet culture, because I know we talk about it a lot and sometimes it can feel a little bit arbitrary, like what actually is diet culture. And the more we understand it and define it, the easier it becomes to spot it, because it's so sneaky. Even though it's so prevalent, it is hiding in so many different ways and forms. And I think even now, especially in this wellness culture that we're living in, it's often disguised as a form of wellness. And so in order to support our kids and protect them and also help them become resilient to diet culture, we need to first really understand what it is and how it shows up and what it looks like. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and then give you just 3 practical tips to help support you in, again, shielding your kids from diet culture over the holidays and really just helping them build resilience to diet culture. But first, what is diet culture? I really love this definition from Christy Harrison, who is a journalist and registered dietitian as well. She has an amazing book called Anti-Diet. If you are just delving into all of this for the first time, I highly recommend that you pick up her book, and I will put a link to it in the show notes for you too. But she really does an amazing job breaking it down and adding so much research, which I think can be really helpful, especially if you feel a little bit skeptical or you're not really sure about, the stats and things behind it. This is a great resource. But she calls diet culture the life thief, which I love. I think it's so fitting. And she talks about it in that way because she describes it as something that steals our joy, our spark, and our life. And yes, I agree with that 100%. And I'm just going to read her definition of this because I think it's absolutely spot on. But she goes on to say that diet culture is a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue, which means you can spend your whole life thinking you're irreparably broken just because you don't look like the impossible thin ideal. Diet culture promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, which means you feel compelled to spend a massive amount of time, energy, and money trying to shrink your body, even though the research is very clear that intentional weight loss fails more than 95% of the time. Diet culture demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others, which means you're forced to be hyper-vigilant about your eating, ashamed of making certain food choices, and distracted from your pleasure, your purpose, and your power. Wow, so spot on, right? And I really want to focus on this last part because I think diet culture shows up very prominently in this way when it comes to feeding kids. So a lot of us can understand the implications of diet culture in our own life, but we may not fully be aware of how it's showing up when it comes to feeding our kids. And this idea of, diet culture demonizing certain ways of eating while elevating others, this is a trap that I see a lot of us as parents falling into where we think, man, if my kid just ate X, Y, and Z, they would be okay or they would be healthy. And it really oversimplifies what health is. And it causes us to hyper-focus so much on nutrition that we miss out on the bigger, more important pieces of actually raising a healthy individual who has a good relationship with food and their body. And that has to do with connection and trust and autonomy and pleasure, like all these aspects of food that get robbed when we hyper focus on the quality of food. And this is not saying that nutrition is not important or that it doesn't matter or that we're just throwing it out the window and that we don't care about it at all. I'm definitely not saying that. And we will definitely have more episodes on this because I know this is a big topic here. I just want you to see the sneaky ways that diet culture shows up, especially when it comes to feeding kids. And I do have a blog post where I talk about this in more depth, and I will definitely link that for you as well. But one thing I just want you to see is the way diet culture can show up when it comes to feeding kids. So, a big characteristic of diet culture are external rules when it comes to feeding ourselves or feeding our children. And when we feel pressured to feed our children certain foods or to get them to eat in certain ways, this can cause us to interfere with the innate intuitive eating abilities that they have. So diet culture in feeding our children can look like being told we're responsible for the outcome of our children's weight and body size and feeling that pressure. And as a result of that pressure, maybe forcing our kids or pressuring them to eat certain foods that they may not be ready for, or on the other side, restricting or withholding certain foods for fear of how it might impact their body size too. Another way diet culture shows up in feeding our children is feeling that our sense of self-worth as parents come from how we feed our kids and what they eat. And, we definitely see this in many different shapes and forms. And this can definitely come out around the holidays too, when we feel like how we're feeding our kids is now under a spotlight and other people are seeing, other people are observing. And, we can feel like we're failing as a parent if our child is not eating in this arbitrary standard that is created by diet culture. Any rules around how or what we feed our children that become paralyzing. So, there's so many rules out there that are very arbitrary, that are highly rooted in diet culture and really don't have any, rhyme or reason to it. It's just things that have gotten perpetuated over time. But, any type of rules that we are holding our kids to that they may not be realistic for, rules around food, again, are big red flags of diet culture showing up in how we feed our kids. Having binary ways of how we think about food. So, kind of saying these foods are good, these foods are bad. I do not bring these foods into my home because they're bad, they're unhealthy. Again, those can be ways that diet culture kind of permeates how we feed our kids. And so one thing to add to Christy Harrison's definition, she calls it the life thief. And I will say, yes, even more so when it comes to feeding our family, because when diet culture is now integrated in the way that we're feeding our family, it directly interferes with our ability to find pleasure and joy and satisfaction, not just in food, but in the feeding interactions that we have with our kids. It really robs us of all of that. And taking some of that back, especially during the holidays, can be so powerful because it allows you to reclaim the joy that should be part of food, and not just food, but sharing that with your family. And when we can do that, it really sends a powerful message to our kids that, again, helps them build resilience to diet culture. Like, hey, we don't need to follow these external rules or guidelines that don't make any sense for us or our family, because I trust you. I trust your body. And we are prioritizing an enjoyment of food and connection and trust, which should be part of feeding our kids. So, that's a little bit of a breakdown. Like I said, stay tuned for more. We will definitely have more conversations around this topic. It's something that I'm very passionate about helping families kind of unpack, because I think, again, sometimes because we're so submersed in diet culture that it's hard to even see the sneaky ways that it shows up, especially when it comes to feeding our children. And I just want to dive in now and transition to some practical application, because I love giving you these tools and tips and hoping that you can walk away with, some resources that can help you today, like in these seasons that you're in. And so I want to share just some ideas to help support you in protecting your kids from diet culture, spotting it, and helping your kids build resilience to it during the holiday season. So these are applicable to the holiday season, but for sure in other times of life as well. So let's dive into these ways that you can help your kids build resilience to these diet culture messages, especially during the holidays. So tip number one here is just shut down the food and the body shaming. I know this can be easier said than done because it's so it's so common that we have just accepted it as part of our life and our social interactions, right? Where people are commenting about how you look, especially when they haven't seen you in a long time. Like, wow, you look so great. Did you lose weight? Like, these are such common focal points of conversations that you do feel like the odd person out when you're like shutting it down or trying to change conversation or avoid the conversation altogether. And this can be really hard, especially when kids are listening. I always say, like, little ears are always listening. Our kids are sponges. They are picking up on the messages that are being communicated, again, verbally in conversations and non-verbally. And one thing I really encourage parents to do, I know it can feel awkward. I just want you to think about, again, the big picture here. And I think so often we worry about offending someone. We worry about being at odds with somebody. And it's not that we are shutting down the person. We're shutting down the diet culture. This is like a systemic issue that we're all part of. And when we choose to be complacent, we are choosing to allow those things to continue. And potentially at the risk of our children, being hurt in some shape or form or picking up on these negative messages. And again, it's not that we can necessarily keep our kids in a bubble and protect them from hearing all these different things that may come up in conversation. However, we don't want our children to see us being complacent in those conversations. This is why, again, thinking about the big picture, we want to be an advocate, not just for our kids, but for ourselves, and kind of challenging the norm of these conversations, especially conversations that center food and body shaming. And so I just want to give you a little pep talk and just really encourage you to be the one that stops those conversations. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge that all of us have different capacity to do this. Some of us are just churning water and just trying to keep our heads afloat and stay alive. And that's okay. If that's where you're at, that's okay. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is not engage in the conversation. And our way of shutting it down might be kind of leaving the room, leaving that situation, changing the subject. It's okay if you don't have capacity to be in an advocate role. Some of us don't, and that's okay. It's really important to honor where you're at and in what capacity that you do have, because your needs matter, your mental health and well-being matter. And sometimes engaging in those conversations can feel more destructive than helpful. So just be mindful of that. However, if you're feeling spicy and you're feeling like you have some room to challenge some of these conversations, I really want to encourage you to engage in them, but in a way that your kids can observe, right? So, if someone's coming up to you, oh, wow, you've gotten so big, or, what are you eating? Whatever, like it can show up in so many different ways. And one little kind of tidbit that I keep in my back pocket that I like to bring out when these conversations happen is just saying, you know what? Really, he's doing great or she's doing great. And there are so many other interesting things about, your child, say your child's name, than how they look, or if the conversation is directed at you. We are really doing our best to honor all bodies, all body sizes. We really believe that all bodies are good and that our appearance and how we look are the least important things about us. And I am just so happy to see you. And I would love to learn more about you and what's going on in your life. And if the conversation is centering around that person, like sometimes people talk about themselves and are sitting there and berating themselves and their bodies, or I shouldn't be eating this, or I'm going to have to jump on that detox, or I'm going to start that new diet or weight loss diet come January 1st, right? Like these are topics of conversations that are happening around family gatherings too. And it's totally okay to put a stop to that and let your kids hear that, especially if they're in earshot, and saying something like, it's so important to just love and accept your body where you're at and learn how to be kind to your body. And really your body size and the way that you look are the least important things about you. One thing I love about you is how kind you are to other people or how thoughtful you are, right? So it's like, these are ways to kind of deviate the conversation, but also to advocate for a different way of thinking and a different way of conversing and socializing that doesn't center food and bodies, right? And it is so beautiful and so powerful when your kids can hear these conversations. It will be a game changer. And these are things that I think, have to think about it like planting seeds, right? Like you are planting seeds over time, but the more that you plant these seeds, the more these seeds will grow. And again, think about it as things that are helping your child build resilience to diet culture. Because what's going to happen is when they find themselves in those situations in the future, when someone's centering their body or talking about their body in a negative way or in a shaming way, they will have your voice in their mind, and they will have internalized those messages that they heard you say about other people's bodies, and that's why I want you to think about the big picture here. And holidays are just like a great opportunity to integrate these conversations. But again, thinking about your capacity and honoring your capacity too, because sometimes we just don't have capacity to deal with people in that way, and that's okay. Those opportunities will come in the future. I guarantee it. So honor yourself and where you're at. Tip number 2 here is to avoid compensation for eating. So again, this is something that we hear a lot of other people doing. And if you have been working really hard on healing your relationship with food, you may not necessarily be engaging in this behavior yourself, but this may be something that you hear other people doing or that your kids are hearing other people doing. And again, the notorious form of this is, oh man, I'm overdoing it, during this holiday, but come New Year's, it's a fresh start. And that is compensation behaviors, right? It can also look like saying, oh, I'm not going to eat all day today so I can save up for this big holiday meal tonight. And sometimes these are subtle, ingrained things that are in us. Again, I want you to be thinking about the subtle ways that diet culture is showing up in how you treat yourself, treat your body, feed your children, and ask yourself, are these compensatory behaviors showing up in any way that could be hindering, your ability to honor your body, or communicating a message to your kids that they can't trust and listen to their bodies? Because remember, our kids are so close to what their bodies are needing innately, and they are honoring that. And a lot of us grew up becoming dissociated from that. And so, this is where we fall to external guidelines and saying things like, oh, I ate this and now I need to compensate by doing Y. And we want to be really careful with this languaging, with this messaging, again, either in things that we're communicating or behaviors that we're exhibiting. Because the messages that our kids can internalize from this is, one, I can't trust my body. Right? Like, I can't listen to my body to guide me with my food choices or with what I'm needing. And so this can be a very dangerous ground. Number two, the other dangerous message that our kids can internalize when they hear these, compensation behaviors happening around food is that, I have to earn my food, or I need to compensate for what I ate. Right? And this is where so many of us picked up messages like, I have to go do X, Y, and Z before I am allowed to eat, or I just ate and now I have to go burn it off. And so exercise can become a form of punishment. And it really, again, disconnects us from our need to eat, but also this inherent worth that we have. Like, you are inherently worthy of feeding yourself and enjoying food, and you do not have to punish yourself for eating in any shape or form. And it's from this ground, like this breeding ground, that food rules can start to develop, or that, again, we start to develop negative associations with eating and with exercise. And so I just want to encourage you to think about that and really look to see if that's showing up in any shape or form around your family, especially during the holiday season. Last tip here that we've kind of talked about a little bit, but just to kind of sum up, is to challenge any ingrained food rules, because this tends to surface a lot during the holidays, especially when there's more foods available that we might not normally have in our home. So right now, sweets are pretty predominant, right? Like, our kids are getting more exposure to sweets. You might be coming home with more cookies or candy or different seasonal things that our kids don't normally have exposure to. And sometimes, in our effort to feel like we're more in control, we can resort and fall back to these ingrained food rules that a lot of us are still trying to unpack and unlearn, right? And that can be really hard to do. But I just want to encourage you to be attentive and cognizant. Are there food rules that are governing how you feed your kids? And is this showing up in a way that could potentially hinder them from learning how to self-regulate? The holiday season can be an amazing time to support our kids in learning how to self-regulate a higher volume of sweets, because that's part of the real world, right? That's part of real life. And a lot of us shy back from that, or maybe, again, fall back to rigidity around food rules, especially around sweets, because we're worried about our kids having this higher influx of them. And so if you find yourself in that boat, definitely go back and check out last week's episode where I share some specific tips on how to help support you and your kids with a higher influx of sweets during the holidays. And I also just want to clarify, because I think this is a point of confusion sometimes. Sometimes when parents hear this idea of kind of unlearning food rules in your family as a way of breaking free from diet culture, sometimes that can be misinterpreted to mean that you throw out all the structure too. Like, there's no structure. Food is just kind of whenever. And our kids do actually need structure. And there's a lot to unpack in that too. And so I will definitely be having future episodes on this topic. But not having food rules is not the same thing as not having structure, because our kids do need a reliable sense and predictability around food, around when food is coming. And, as parents, we do need to take responsibility in offering them food frequently and not putting that responsibility on their shoulders. However, within that context of structure, we want to be intentional about offering the foods that they're showing a high interest in, especially sweets during this holiday season. So, ingrained food rules can look something like, well, we get one sweet a day, like you get one sweet and that's it. And a lot of us grew up in that way where we were allowed to have sweet one time or, sweets only after eating X, Y, and Z. And these are those ingrained food rules that can show up and again, be perpetuated in how we're feeding our kids. And this is how diet culture can subtly get recycled through to another generation. And so I just want to encourage you to think about how you approach food in your family. Are there subtle ways that diet culture is sneaking in, and maybe some old food rules that are still embedded and kind of showing up? Food rules help us feel like we are in control, but it's giving us a false sense of control. And there's a big difference between being in control and being in charge as a parent. And as a parent, we want to be in charge, and we want to provide structure and reliability, but the control piece is something that we often have to let go in order to support our kids in building autonomy and trust within their bodies. And so I want you to just think about that as you're examining how you're approaching food, especially during this holiday season. And, it takes so much courage to have this self-examination, right? To be self-aware, to be curious. And I just want to encourage you also to be compassionate with yourself, knowing that a lot of these things have been embedded in us for years and have been passed down to us from so many previous generations. Like, these are not new things. They may evolve into new forms, but they're the same old premises that are rooted in diet culture. And by taking the time to have some self-awareness and examine how this is showing up for you, you have the potential and the possibility to shift away from this to create a new feeding legacy for your family, which is amazing and so exciting. And so I just want to recognize, the fact that you're even tuning in and listening to this shows how much you care. And I just applaud your effort. Like, this is huge. And I hope you can see that within yourself, and also just give compassion to yourself through this process, and knowing it takes time and you don't have to do it all at once. You certainly don't have to do it overnight. And as you kind of navigate your holiday season, maybe think about one thing that you want to focus on to really kind of reclaim the joy that should be part of food and celebrating that, especially during the holidays with your family. So I hope this has been encouraging for you. I appreciate you tuning in. And as always, would love to hear your feedback, your questions. You can always connect with me through email, which is hello@crystalkargas.com. I am gearing up content for all of next year. And so if you have some specific topics or questions in mind, I would love to hear what those are so I can address those for you in the coming year. But I just want to thank you so much. And from my family to yours, wish you a very happy holiday season, and can't wait to connect with you again soon. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lift the Shame podcast. For more tips and guidance on your motherhood journey, come connect with me on Instagram @crystalkargas. Until next week, Mama, I'll be cheering you on. Bye for now.